The elite group of fighters who become members of the UFC roster all have their own unique journeys with the organization. That said, sooner or later, even the very best will part ways with the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Be it retirement, release, or simply opting for free agency, no one stays with the world's most recognized MMA brand forever. Still, in most cases, when an athlete leaves the promotion, there is usually at least the possibility of a return at some point. However, the 10 fighters we are about to discuss are definitely the exception to the previous statement. In this episode, we'll take a look at several MMA stars that burned their bridge back into the UFC, each having committed acts Dana White and company deemed worthy of banishment. As always, if you guys enjoy this video, then please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Now, without further ado, and ranked in no particular order, let's take a look at 10 fighters that are banned from the UFC. Number 10. Paul Daley. England's Paul Semtex Daley had a brief but memorable stint in the UFC. After winning his first 2 bouts in the organization against Martin Kampmann and Dustin Hazlett, Daley found himself competing in a title eliminator bout at UFC 113. His opponent at UFC 113 would be Ultimate Fighter alumni Josh Koscheck. The two talked quite a bit of trash leading up to and even during their highly anticipated bout. However, as far as the contest itself, Koscheck used his wrestling to coast to a decision win. Frustrated by the outcome and his opponent's taunting during the match, Daley decided to sucker punch his rival after the bell. The action would prompt Dana White to ban the talented striker from the UFC for life.
These guys are professional athletes. You don't ever hit a guy blatantly after the bell like that. That will not ever be tolerated, and he's done. I don't care if he fights in every show all over the world and becomes the best, and everybody thinks he's the pound-for-pound best in the world. He will never fight in the UFC ever again.
Paul Daley would enjoy a good deal of success outside the organization and even became a main event attraction in Bellator. Still, despite his accomplishments, over a decade after the infraction, the ban has never been lifted. Number 9. Matt Riddle. After introducing himself to UFC fans on The Ultimate Fighter 7, Pennsylvania's Matt Riddle had a solid run with the promotion. Unfortunately, the former college wrestler's marijuana use would end up shorting his MMA career. After testing positive for cannabis twice in a 1-year span, Riddle had fallen out of favor with UFC President Dana White, to put it mildly.
You're so weak-minded and so addicted to marijuana that you couldn't stay off it enough to pass a drug test 3 times a year. Well, guess what, dummy? They drug test in the real world, too.
When asked about his recent released employee, White referred to the future pro wrestling star as a moron and made it clear Riddle wouldn't be welcome back in the octagon. It's worth noting, if not for the failed tests, Riddle would have had a stellar 9-3 record in the UFC. In any case, the former welterweight has embarked on a very successful career in WWE, becoming the United States champion in 2020. Number 8. Rousimar Palhares. Former UFC middleweight Rousimar Palhares was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu ace with a nasty ground game. While the grappler out of Rio de Janeiro knew when to apply a submission, letting go was another story. Following his victory at UFC 111, Palhares was suspended for 90 days for failing to release a heel hook after the initial stoppage. Sadly, the troubled black belt didn't learn his lesson. At a UFC Fight Night event in 2013, Palhares submitted Mike Pierce in 31 seconds with a heel hook, but once again refused to let go until his opponent had tapped a total of 8 times. Understandably fed up, Dana White handed Palhares his walking papers, insisting he's done in the UFC.
And this is the second incident we've had with Palhares where he had the lock and he didn't let it go. Finally, he let it go, but yeah, I'm going to cut him too.
Not just a suspension, he's done.
He's done.
He would later be released from the World Series of Fighting for, you guessed it, failing to let go of a submission, this time in a bout with Jake Shields. Number 7. Ruslan Magomedov. Ruslan Magomedov is one of the many high-level mixed martial artists to come out of Dagestan in recent years. The powerful heavyweight had a perfect 3-0 record in the UFC, but issues with the United States Anti-Doping Agency, also known as USADA, derailed his once promising career. Magomedov tested positive for banned substances, such as ostarine and anabolic steroids on multiple occasions. In 2019, he refused to complete the sample collection process required for out-of-competition testing, to make matters worse. As a result of his actions, Ruslan Magomedov made history by becoming the first UFC fighter to receive a lifetime ban from USADA, marking the end of his UFC run. Number 6. War Machine. War Machine, originally known by the name Jonathan Copenhaver, fought just twice in the UFC in the late 2000s. The striker from California would go 1-1 in the promotion, before being cut from the UFC for turning down a fight with Brendan Wolf, as well as making insensitive comments about the late fighter Evan Tanner, who had tragically died while camping out in a California desert. That said, the Ultimate Fighter 6 contestant would gain a great deal of notoriety, though sadly not for his fighting skills. In March of 2017, the disgraced MMA pro would be convicted on 29 felony counts. The charges stemmed from an incident in which War Machine assaulted his ex-girlfriend, adult film star Christy Mack. He would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 36 years. It's fair to say the UFC won't be welcoming War Machine back with open arms if he's ever set free. Of course, he'll likely be old enough to collect Social Security should that day come. Number 5. BJ Penn. The prodigy BJ Penn is a UFC Hall of Famer with a resume most professional fighters would envy. The former two-division world champion defeated the biggest stars of his era, including fighters like Sean Shirk and Matt Hughes. Unfortunately, the proud Hawaiian continued to compete when he was well past his prime and ended his career on a 7-fight losing streak. Penn's close relationship with the UFC brass, specifically Dana White, allowed him to hang around in the promotion long after most competitors would have been released. However, when footage surfaced showing the former champ involved in a bar brawl, the UFC finally decided to part ways with the MMA legend. Following the controversial incident, Dana White told the media he won't fight again. That's a wrap.
Then you see videos come out of him, in an altercation in Hawaii. What were your thoughts when you saw those videos?
He won't fight again.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it. That's a wrap.
Number 4. Randy Couture. As a 6-time UFC champion, Randy the Natural Couture is the most decorated fighter in the organization's history. The former Olympic wrestling alternate has beaten a who's who of MMA legends, including Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Vitor Belfort, and Mark Coleman. Still, despite working for the promotion for roughly a decade, Couture didn't depart on the best terms. The Natural signed a contract with Spike TV, which at the time was affiliated with UFC's leading competitor Bellator MMA. As punishment for the perceived slight, the UFC banned their former star from cornering his own son, Ryan Couture, during his Octagon debut in 2013.
He's not cornering him. Randy Couture can't buy a ticket to this
Though he claims to harbor no ill will toward Dana White and company, there is no indication that the expendable star will ever be welcomed back.
Do you feel a little bit betrayed by Randy?
Well, I can tell you this. Randy Couture comes off as the greatest guy in the world, Captain America. He's the furthest thing from it. And I'm happy to not be in business with him anymore.
Number 3. Caleb Starnes. Canada's Caleb Starnes' career got off to a hot start following his appearance on The Ultimate Fighter 3, but would eventually fizzle out. In truth, the former middleweight competitor is best remembered for the act that would lead to his dismissal from the UFC. At UFC 38, Starnes went head-to-head with another Ultimate Fighter contestant in Nate Quarry. Unfortunately, their bout would go down as one of the most bizarre contests the sport has ever seen. Quarry spent most of the fight chasing his opponent around and mocking him with bizarre gestures. For his part, Starnes ran around the octagon and avoided contact for the majority of the 3-round affair. The elusive antics earned Starnes his less than flattering nickname, Running Man. Dana White was not the least bit amused by the Running Man. White would go on to tell Yahoo Sports that Starnes just doesn't belong in the UFC, and after his performance, he should consider a new line of work. Caleb Starnes continued to compete following his release. He last fought in 2016, and his professional record currently stands at 17, 11, and 1. Number 2. Thiago Silva. Thiago Silva was a well-rounded fighter who carved out a role for himself in the UFC. That said, legal issues cut his tenure with the promotion short and would eventually alienate him from the organization altogether. In 2014, Silva was involved in a domestic dispute with his estranged wife and a local Florida gym owner named Pablo Popovich. The authorities were contacted, with the UFC standout eventually being charged with aggravated assault and resisting arrest. When Dana White got wind of the ordeal, he publicly proclaimed that Silva was banned from the UFC. The Brazilian would be cleared of all charges and briefly re-signed with the company. However, when less than flattering video and audio evidence was released from the 2014 incident, so was Silva, this time for good. Number 1. Jason Mayhem Miller. Thanks to his appearance on the MTV series Bully Beatdown and an infamous brawl with the Diaz brothers during his Strikeforce days, Jason Mayhem Miller was already a known commodity before he signed his first multi-fight deal with the UFC. Of course, Miller had fought once with the company back in 2005, when he took on George St. Pierre at UFC 52. That said, his second stint turned out to be a bit more memorable. After coaching opposite Michael Bisping on The Ultimate Fighter, Miller was beaten soundly by the Brit in the 2011 series finale. The former MTV star followed things up with another one-sided loss to CB Dalloway at UFC 146. Prior to the pay-per-view event, Miller claimed he would retire if he lost to Dalloway. However, Dana White beat him to the punch by firing the popular middleweight instead, saying his days with the promotion were done. The UFC president also claimed he was fed up with Miller's backstage antics and even referred to him as a clown.
Something happened here backstage after Mayhem's done. He's gone.
What happened?
Just some bullshit that I don't want to talk about. When you get embarrassed the way that you did against Michael Bisping, and then you show up at the next fight with pink, fucking whatever that thing was on and all that other shit, I'm not into that stuff. It's not my thing. Come on, man. You know, take this thing serious. You want to be a clown, you can do that later. Do that on your reality show.
Roughly a year after his release, Miller was arrested for domestic violence. When asked about his former employee's personal troubles, White made his feeling for Miller clear, proclaiming, "I'm not a big fan. I never have been a fan, and I'm not gonna be a fan anytime soon." While he technically never used the word banned, one can still safely conclude that Mayhem won't be affiliated with the UFC while Dana White is running the show. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.